So today I'm going to present a paper about the evaluation on one of the voluntary environmental management regulations in ISO 14001. It's to investigate its impact on firms' waste management behavior as well as their performance in the context of Vietnam. So this is joint work with some of my colleagues back in Japan. In the literature of international trade and foreign direct investment, people usually pay attention to the positive spillover impact after the investment. However, the environmental pollution is also an inevitable problem that the decision makers all have to deal with, especially in the context of developed countries. So starting from that point, we position our paper as one of the studies that investigated effectiveness of the environmental policies in the context of in the context of Vietnam, and that's the starting point. All right, here's the list of contents I'm going to cover in the presentation. To begin with, I would like to talk about how we come up with the idea. It all starts with the fact that there is an increasing trend of the newly released ISO 14000 certificates in ASEAN areas, which consist of 10 Southeastern countries. And among them, Vietnam is one of the major driving forces. As you can see from the graph on the right-hand side, except for year 2008, when the world economic crisis hit, there has been a stable increase of the ISO 14000 certificate adoption in Vietnam. So before we move on to discuss why this issue is important in the context of Vietnam, I would like to talk more about ISO, the regulation itself. So you might have heard about the Bhopal disaster, which is the gas leak accident happened in India back in 1984. So ever since then, the environmentalists realized that actually it's urgent to set up a certain regulations to curb the waste discharge. And in 1996, so ISO 14001 has been released by the International Organization for Standardization. That's the start of this regulation. And why firms have the incentive to adopt this regulation? So the mechanism is that ISO 14001, it can reduce the waste management costs for firms by streamlining the environmental management system, and this will in turn enhance firms' reputation. But it doesn't come free. According to John and Basil, they're actually the initial adopting cost might be expensive, especially for small and medium-sized firms. So firms actually are faced with the trade-off. So they know that this regulation is good. It can help you reduce the management cost, but you have to pay that. So because of the voluntary nature of this certificate adoption, here comes our research question. We wonder, conditional on the initial adoption of this regulation, how does it affect the firm's behavior as well as their performance after the adoption? So here's the figure to show the difference in treated waste share using the actual data we have at hand, which is the annual enterprise survey from the GSO in Vietnam, covering 3 years. As you can see, the blue column here indicates the treated waste share, which is the treated waste over the total waste, for the ISO 40000 adopted firms versus the non-adopted firms. So no matter what kind of index we use in our estimate, in the description, you can see there is a higher, the treated waste share for the ISO adopted firms than that of the non-ISO adopted firms. On the other hand, if you take a look at the TFP, which is calculated using the stochastic frontier method, the mean for the TFP distribution for ISO adopted firms, which is 0.6, is slightly larger than the mean of the non-ISO adopted firms. So in this paper, we want to use more rigorous methods to verify if such kind of a causality relation actually exists. All right, I would like to talk about more about why we want to focus on Vietnam and why it's important. So, as you might know, heard about the Doi Moi economic reform in 1986. So ever since then, there has been a huge increase in economic growth in Vietnam, but it's also associated with the environmental pollution. Actually, according to the survey of the World Bank, the air pollution because of the industrialization has reached a certain point that has already posed a threat to human health. So actually, it's quite urgent for the Vietnamese government to figure out something that can curb the waste discharge of the manufacturing firms. And also because, according to the VEA, which is Vietnamese Environmental Association, only 33% of industry zones use the wastewater treatment system. So we hope that the finding in our paper can at least give some inspiration to the decision maker of the Vietnamese government to work out something, policies in the near future. So that's the starting point. What have we found in this paper? So controlling the determinants by ISO 14001, we show that ISO 40000 adopted firms actually they have a higher rate of waste control, and in the same time, this will in turn benefit the firms in terms of because they have higher average wage turnover and TFP as well. And the contribution of this paper is listed up here. To our knowledge, it's the first paper to investigate how the participation in the voluntary management regulations can actually affect a firm's behavior. And we measure ISO 40000 contribution by using multiple indexes as well as firm's performance, which hasn't been done by the previous literature. All right, because our research question is quite straightforward, I'm not going to talk about the details of the literature here. Because the impact of ISO adoption actually consists of two stages. The first, you have to adopt this regulation. The second, how does it affect the firm's behavior. So there are two lines of literature we have to consider in this paper. The first one is determinants by ISO 14001. In the previous literature, they have shown that the firm size, export standards, the pressure from the foreign customers, and as well as the international ownership, they play positive and significant impact on firms' adoption of this regulation. And furthermore, Cohen Allett and Whaler, they show that capital intensity might be another factor to influence the firm's adoption of ISO, but they didn't verify it in the empirical way, so we want to take that into account as well. Well, on the other hand, in the second stage, as far as the ISO's impact on firms' behavior, so the serious study by Alima has shown that this adoption actually does have a positive impact on firms' waste control behavior. So that's the literature part. Let's go to the empirical verification part. So as for the data, it's collected by the General Statistics Office in Vietnam. It originally consisted of 12 years data, but unfortunately, for the ISO 14000 information, it's only available for 3 years, so we can only use that in our estimation. But they have very sufficient, adequate information in terms of air, liquid, and solid waste amount. They also have the FEI amount as well as other control variables. They also have the labor in capital so that we can calculate the firm's TFP as well. Finally, we'll limit our analysis to manufacturing sectors only because over 80% of the firms that report having adopted ISO 14001 are from the manufacturing sectors. So, but in the robustness check, we include all the samples as well. All right. So as for the estimation strategy, so people might argue that the firms that have a higher ratio, they have higher waste discharge might self-select to adopt this ISO 14000 because they want to raise up their firm reputation. And the other way, for example, the firms which are more financially sufficient might have more incentive to adopt this regulation. So there's a self-selection problem in our estimation, in identification part. Because of that, to alleviate that kind of a bias, we adopted two-stage least square instrumental variable model. So in the first stage, while controlling the firm's characteristics, which is in the vector of x, we also include some instruments which affects the adoption of ISO, but doesn't have are not correlated with firm's behavior, such as the ones we listed up here. In practice, we also use the first lag of ISO to alleviate the reverse causality problem. And for robustness check, we also include the more lags of these instruments, and also test using the more lags of the difference for these instruments. However, because we only have 3 years of data, we cannot adopt a certain kind of a GMM style estimation, but we're still looking for a more ideal instrument in our future study. So on the second step, we regress the propensity of ISO 40000 adoption on firm's behavior. So the dependent variables consist of the following variables. In the robustness check part, we also use the propensity score matching, using also either nearest of matching or kernel matching. And there's another thing we need to emphasize here is there's some challenge we need to overcome in the data set, because we don't know in which year the firm actually adopted ISO 14000, but the certificate actually expired in 3 years. So there might be the possibility that firms might change the ISO status during the period of estimation. So there might be the sample bias in our case. So because of that, we divide the firms by the ISO status. That is to say, for example, the firm has the ISO 40000 all of the 3 years, we count them as one group. And for those who doesn't have the ISO for the whole years, we conclude them as the 000 part. And then we estimate by groups. Well, that doesn't change our quality prediction.
So the renovation process is automatic, or you should do it again? The renovation of the certificate is automatic?
They need to type it.
Okay.
Yeah, not automatic. They need to pay more.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. So I will skip the statistic summary part and go jump into the result part. So when we use the two-stage least square estimation, as you can see from the first stage, when we use the treated solid waste ratio as the dependent variable, FDI capital share, as well as the capital labor ratio, they are positive and significant in firms' adoption of this regulation. And in the second stage, the adoption of ISO 40000 actually plays a significant and positive role in firms' waste control, as well. Waste control. Well, when we use other dependent variables, it all shows the adoption of this regulation all shows a positive and significant impact. When we use the propensity score matching, here I only show you the nearest matching option. No matter what kind of dependent variable we use, the ATT always shows a positive and a significant, except for solids. They all show the positive and significant impact, showing that the adoption of this regulation actually works. To further illustrate the mechanism of how firms adopt this regulation, we apply a two-stage dynamic theoretical model here. But because of the time constraint, I'm not going to go through the details of derivation of this model. So I just introduce in brief and give you some intuition of how we came up with the conclusion. So basically, we assume there are two firms that produce the homogeneous goods. One is the foreign firm here, one is the domestic firm. So initially, foreign firm will have a better abatement technology than the domestic firm. So in the first stage, they're faced with one strategy, which is the ISO 14001. And in the second stage, on observing the opponent movement, each firm, they choose their best response and compete in a Kuno manner. So each firm try to maximize their profits. But here, so what we are interested in actually have three cases. The first one is only for foreign firms adopt this strategy. The second is domestic firms adopt. And in the third case, both firms adopt it. Well, this is a graph to show you the intuition of how actually this works. So in case one, indicates when the foreign firms adopted this strategy. So in equilibrium, the best response output for the foreign firms actually increase from the point A to point B. And in the same way, the domestic firms will also increase their output. And we'll show that in the paper that the profit gain for the foreign firms actually is larger than the domestic firms. And also in case 3, the profit gain for foreign firms is also larger, which indicates the firm that has a better technology or abatement technology has a higher incentive to adopt this ISO 40000. But we're still working on the theoretical part to extend to the second stage as well.
So how do you differentiate between foreign firm and domestic firm in your model?
In the data or in model?
Yeah. How do you differentiate between them?
We just differentiate by the tech abatement technology. Yes, and also, only difference. All right. The conclusion. So in this paper, we investigate the role of the ISO 14000 adoption on firms' waste control as well as their performance, and we show that the adoption actually promotes firms to curb their waste discharge as well as increase their performance in terms of turnover and TP. Well, on the other hand, apart from the traditional determinants, we also found that FDI share and capital intensity are important factors for firms that adopt ISO 14001. Based on this finding, it to some extent provide us with the evidence to be against the conclusion having the hypothesis, because here shows actually the more the foreign share in the firm actually has more incentive to adopt this voluntary environmental system, right? So because of that, we might give some policy implications for the decision maker of the Vietnamese government that more policies should be made to curb the environmental waste discharge for domestic firms in Vietnam. Well, still, we have a to-do list here. For example, we need to extend our theoretical model to include the second stage of ISO's adoption on the firm's behavior, and also we need to find more decent instruments for ISO dummy, and we need to do some robustness as well. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you.